It is exactly 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, and it is Tuesday, December the 8th. Welcome to five, week five of Introduction to Criminal Law. I'm Professor Richard Wright. That means we have one more week left, and we will be done for the year and for this quarter. So I told you it would go fast, and here we are. So let me go right into sharing my screen. Okay. And I'll come right down here. Hope you had a chance to look at this video to remind you that this is where we are. Week five. Our next lecture will take place on the 15th. The course ends on the 18th, as you will see. Looking at the course calendar. This is where we are now. Reading assignment was given yesterday, and along with, I sent you chapter 7 of the PowerPoint. Your initial post is due tonight, and that's drunk driving. The lecture reply post due Saturday the 12th on drunk driving. And then on the 13th, stop talking, Alexa. Alexa, sometimes I have this Alexa near me and it takes over. And then your written assignment. Stop, Alexa. Alexa, stop. If you have one of those near you, you know what those do. I didn't think I said anything close to it. But anyway, your written assignment for the 13th is has a hate crime been committed? That will be due then, and then as well as your key word. And then next Monday, the 14th, we start the final week. So it will be all over. And notice that it ends on the 18th, not the 19th, not the 20th, but the 18th. All assignments that are not in. And by the way, since we are now at week five, assignments from weeks 1 to 3, I will not be grading them. I will not be accepting them unless arrangements have been made. I warned earlier that you had to turn those in by the end of week 4, and that is where we are. We are in week 5 now. Okay, so now let's go to the module. Look at the assignments. So your discussion post that's due tonight, considering using this scenario here, and then in your initial reply, the question is, has the crime of drunk or drug driving been committed by either of those parties, the male or the female or both? And explain your position in your initial post, and explain what enforcement action you would take, and then what would you do with the truck. That's your initial post. And your reply post, examine another post that contrasts with yours, defend your position in that post. Okay. Reminding you about the guides to Rasmussen. I told you about that already. I'm not going to click on that. I've been clicking on that every week, so you should know about that by now. Okay, so now let's look at the written assignment that you have, and that has a hate crime been committed. And this module is dealing with crimes against moral value. Hold on a second. I gotta close the door. All right. Yeah, my office is in the lower level as well as the laundry room, and the door was open. So anyway, we're going to focus in this module on crimes against moral values, and um, which includes victimless crimes of drug and alcohol abuse and other things that are committed. And so you're going to play three roles. This is a three-part assignment. I'm going to say this right now. Each part needs to be one page, double spaced. APA must contain citations in the body. Not a citation, but citations in the body. I recommend running the paper through Grammarly. The second thing I'm going to say is this. Only one reference page. You don't have to have three separate reference pages. And you don't have to submit three different assignments, but just complete part one, at least if you finish part one on a second page, don't start that one, part two there. Go to a fresh page to start each one so that I will clearly know. All right? Definitely. Make sure and just label it part one. Okay? So in this first part, you're going to analyze from the perspective of a police officer, that you're the law enforcement officer. And here is the scenario. And as I said earlier, one page. If it's less than that, you're going to lose points. Explain whether or not the elements of a hate crime have been met in this case. Explain one other crime that Luke may have committed and how were the elements of the crime met. That's what you're going to do from the perspective of a police officer. Remember, the police officer makes a determination that a crime has been committed, and you're going to determine what that crime is, explain any other crimes that may have been committed. If there are none that you can discover, say, I cannot discover any other crimes, but there are others in there. I can tell you that already. The second part, apply the hate crimes from the perspective of a defense lawyer, that you're defending Luke, okay? And you're going to take this as defense attorney, okay? And you're going to use this scenario. To complete this part, minimum one page, again, what element or elements does the state have to prove to demonstrate that this is a hate crime? Okay? Keeping in perspective that in a criminal case, you must be able to prove that a person committed a crime by what standard? What standard do we use in criminal cases for determining if a person is guilty or innocent? Tell me. Type it in the chat. What standard? Do you know what I mean when I say what standard? Type in if you don't know. Do you know? Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. There's two standards that are used. In a civil case, we use preponderance of the evidence. What's the standard for criminal case? beyond a reasonable doubt. You ever heard that before? Yeah, I know. Those are the standards. So when somebody says, what are the standards in a criminal case for determining if a person is guilty, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So um, that's the question. I will ask you questions because on things that I know you should already know. And that's not a difficult one, but you start thinking too deeply, as students oftentimes do. And you'll have the answer, but you're afraid to throw it out there. It's okay, this is the place to be wrong. So, anyway, what elements must the state prove to demonstrate this hate crime beyond a reasonable doubt? That's not the element, that's the standard. What strategies would you use to show that Luke didn't intentionally target the victim? Remember, you're the defense attorney now. And then the final is also one page, and you're going to try to determine from the detective's perspective, analyze the case submitted by the patrol officer, who is basically the police officer, and responding to a call. And then you're going to utilize these facts scenario. Determine femicide. Of course, so if you're going to define femicide, you're going to define it, and then you're going to provide an explanation of what it is and apply it to the facts. If this is, or if it is not. Remember, citations. Because if you define femicide and you don't have a citation after that, that means then you know already from your own knowledge. But even if I did, I still would get a source and cite it. Explore a hate crime law and determine if cases of femicide are hate crimes, and if and why or why not. Okay. APA formatted tells you that. I already told you that. That means a cover page, Roman 12, double space, not single space, double space. It means that citation in the body, not a citation, but citations throughout the paper. You get dinged when you put one citation in there and I see the rest of your paper doesn't have any citations. And then the, the reference page, among other things that you know about APA. And then here's the guide that can help you. Then if you need refresher on APA, this is found in here as well about the assignment. And then if you need tutoring and so forth. Now, if you look at the rubric breaks it down the same way. And it tells you the same thing. Notice each one a minimum of one page. And then we're going to look at the corrections for spelling, grammar, appropriate mechanics, no typos, APA citation, and appropriate sources, no Wikipedia or generic sources, for a total of 40 points. Any questions about the written assignment? Has a hate crime been committed? Okay, all right. So now we can move on. The very last thing is the live classroom key phrase that or word I give you. Okay, and you'll give that. So all of these are due. This is due Sunday, and this is due Sunday, and then this is due tonight and Saturday. The reply. All right. So now let's get to the topic. Crimes against moral values, and let's talk about them. for the remainder of the period. So we're going to talk about drug laws, drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, and conclude dealing with hate crimes. Okay. And then we'll go over a few of these practice things. Remember the importance of these. They prepare you for next week. Next week, you have a quiz. That is like your final exam. And the quiz for next week will cover what weeks? What weeks will it cover? Yep, exactly. 4, 5, and 6. And so I encourage you guys to, I take the time to show you, but I don't go through all of them. But use those for your study. We'll talk about more of that next week. Okay. So let's get right into drug laws. As you should be aware, if you are in my other class, Joe, are you in my other class, drugs and crime now? Oh, okay. Yeah, it usually students take it together. I have several students in this class. It's a very interesting class. It's a little different than it was before, but because I do a lecture on that Wednesday night. But one of the things that I always say up front is this: there is a strong correlation between criminal law and drug usage. Uh, Many people commit criminal offenses to support their drug habits, and that I don't advocate a lock them up and throw away the key uh, for individuals who are not the distributors now. Now, listen to me. There are distributors who are distributors because they have to support their habit, but then there are some that are not. But for those who have a drug problem, you could lock up a person for 20 years and let them out. And if you don't address the issue of drugs that they have, then you're going to, it's not going to, they're going to be recidivists because you haven't gotten to the root of the problem. And so you're going to hear me as we talk about this portion, keeping in mind that I'm more of a individual who lean toward rehabilitation, helping people to kick the habit. If you kick the habit, there will be no customers or fewer customers, and it could cause to get a handle. So what we're going to talk about right now is the fact that there is legislation that constantly is passed with an attempt to control the use of drugs, and because of the fact that, yes, some people think it's purely moral because they only hurt themselves, but that is not true. They hurt themselves, they hurt their family, um, um, and the innocent bystanders. Talks about um, they're bad for the person, destroy their quality of life. So there are plenty of victims to go around. Um, and so what happens is that individuals, as I said earlier in this last sentence, other traditional crimes such as robbery may be motivated by addicts. So is theft, those kinds of things. Uh, so so here's what's happened. The regulation of drugs have been set out by what we call the Uniform Controlled Substances Act. And this came out early in the 1900s, where 19 actually drugs were around from then. but in the 1970s is actually by the time they came up with the categorizing them. But the drugs were around before that for many, 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 many years. And so now they classify them into these 5 schedules, depending on the potency of the drug. And you can see they have a definition here that the higher the potential for abuse and the more serious drugs, the way I put it, are in Schedule 1, heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and marijuana, which is most interesting because of those 3 that are given as examples, marijuana is being legalized all across the United States. And the House the other day, U.S. House of Representatives, passed a measure that I think has to go to the Senate before it goes to the president's desk to legalize marijuana on the federal level. Because a lot of people think that when marijuana is legalized in the state, that it's automatically legalized in the feds. Technically, no. You are not. You can still be arrested by the feds for possession of marijuana in jurisdictions where marijuana is legal. So anyway, they say that there are 3 bullet points: high potential for abuse, no medicinal use, even though marijuana does have some of that, lack of demonstrated safety under medical supervision. So these first 3, especially heroin and dealing with the opioid epidemic, LSD going back to the 60s. Oh man, I remember people would go on trips, we call them acid heads, and they would ingest this LSD and they would go out and they would sometimes not make it back. Ecstasy is when you also take a trip as well, but there are adverse effects on the body. And if you move down here, Schedule 2, you get the oxycodone, opium, and cocaine. High potential for abuse, as same as 2. But it says acceptable medical use with restrictions. Well, that's because some of these are used for medicine, but the excessive use mixed with other chemicals create the dangers to individuals. But all of these lead to psychological or physical dependence. I think that Schedule 1 fits in that as well. To be honest with you, I think that happens with heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and I believe marijuana. Marijuana, I refer to it as what we call a gateway drug. A gateway drug is when you have a drug that's not as serious in terms of use, so it says, even though it's Schedule 1, and it leads to more severe drugs. That's why we call them gateways. Then Schedule 3s, lower potential. This is when we start getting into medicine. Tylenol with codeine, Suboxone, ketamine, and anabolic steroids. All the way down to Schedule 5, the least cough suppressants or medications. I know a guy that he was what we call a syrup addict. And when I say that, he would literally get bottles of cough syrup and he would drink them. And that was his high. It says least potential for physical or psychological dependence. Well, again, these are just levels that they talk about. However, they all are dangerous. They all are. And so the Uniform Controlled Substance Act identifies marijuana as a violent narcotic, an unspeakable scourge, but it's really funny. The real public enemy number 1. But it's being legalized. Go figure on that one. And the reason they said they're legalizing it is because it's sold illegally. Is cocaine next? Cocaine is very serious And so what has happened is that when you find cocaine, now what has made it really a dangerous commodity that came out in the 80s was crack cocaine, where they boiled the cocaine and turned it into little rocks. And then the people would smoke it and snort it. They, sometimes uh, break it down and then put their lion's nose up, and they would do that. I was the village attorney and police officer. If you listen to my story, uh, where I was in a town called Ford Heights, which was called the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs, and there were many houses in that community that were converted to uh, uh, crack houses. And there were many explosions because when they cooked them on the stove with other chemicals added in, it made it volatile. And so, moving to the point that there were many fires that took place. And so we talk about the 80s and the 90s, and it starts talking about here what I just got through talking about when crack cocaine um, made the war on drugs even more serious because they started reaching the point to tell people just say no. Well, as you know, when you become dependent on it, it's not as easy to say just say no. And when you take the drugs and crime course, you hear me talk about the theories that are there, that it's an illness and people are stuck on it. And so the war on drugs uh, and just say no became popular. But the problem has increased. Now there's a distribution of crack cocaine by the gangs, which, because of their distribution of this, to protect themselves, they have these high-powered weapons, and many innocent people are killed as a result of that. And so what has happened now is that the war on drugs led to the creation of um, regulation on marijuana and drug courts. And the drug courts would be an attempt to try to help individuals, maybe give them some time, but also require as a condition that those individuals receive help. And I represented many people in drug court. It was a separate court that was for people who had problems. However, not very successful because of a number of reasons. The monies that were allocated to deal with this are not plentiful. And so it's like halfway halfway painting a house. The other half of the house stays the old color, and eventually it doesn't look right. Well, that's the same thing that happens when you have a half-hearted attempt at trying to get a person to kick drugs. It has to be 100%. Otherwise, they'll increase it as time goes on. So, uh, so there's a debate about marijuana, and I already spoke on that. So I'm not going to spend much more time uh, talking about that. So now we move down to the possession of a controlled substance. And so what has happened is that now we've reached the stage that we now will take these drugs based upon possession. There's what we call actual possession, where it's on the person of an individual. Um, like I said, for example, a bag of cocaine in a person's pocket. And then constructive occurs when a person has control over an area, such as in your vehicle or in your home or something like that. And so there are many states that have written their own possession controlled substance acts that can basically have these three elements: knowingly possessing a controlled substance. A controlled substance is one of those that fit within that category of that we just covered, of one of those schedules from 1 to 5, or a controlled substance analog. Now, a controlled substance analog is not on there, but these are manufactured drugs like K2 or Spice, uh, which are similar to marijuana, except one thing is that they can't be detected in a drug test, but that there are individuals who utilize these things, these analog drugs, and they do all kinds of wild things. Again, I cover that more in detail in the drugs and crime course, J250. So you get a chance to take that. I think they'll offer that. I don't know if they'll offer it next term until term 2, because that's when I usually teach it, term 2. But anyway, um, the point of the matter is that what has happened just from all of this stuff that you see here is that you discover that individuals with smaller quantities, um, they will get them some help. But the higher the quantity, the more jail time that a person would receive. And so what has happened is that individuals who have a quantity that appears to be an amount that they intend to sell or distribute, or as we say in the legal terms, that possession with intent to deliver. That means that you have a quantity that's not just for your personal use, but to make a profit on. You get more time. And so there are laws and jurisdictions that vary, and you could look at your own state laws and you can see variations in how they're applied in terms of the schedule for delivery and sale of drugs. Again, those in Schedule 1 carry the most time, and then you get down to the lower ones that I said. So controlled substance, as it says, not only put the individual user at risk, but also other individuals, also individuals driving their cars who drive under the influence, not just of alcohol, but of drugs as well. So the point of the matter is that their ability to control that vehicle is impaired. And so that's what I wanted to tell you about drug laws. This is just a brief summary of it. So now let's show you what happens with the law in terms of driving under drugs or driving under alcohol, drunk driving, and according to the law, you can be sentenced to jail, but you can lose your license and ability. And notice some of the facts that are here. 28 people die each day in motor vehicle crashes involving an alcohol impaired driver. This is DUIs. One person dies every 53 minutes in an alcohol related crash. Alcohol impaired driving accounts for 31% of driving fatalities. A total of 9,067 died in alcohol related crashes in 2014, and then the annual financial impact is astronomical. So it's a very serious thing. You should be aware, though, and this is something that I've discovered from paying attention to what the media is reporting. Drunk driving has taken a back seat to COVID-19. COVID-19 is the #1 killer from guns and everything else that's killing people. But these, and actually the drunk driving has gone down some because people are not out as much. They're still out, but you know what I'm saying. And so it has decreased it to a point. However, it's still very dangerous. Now, you should be aware that when you drive, you give consent that if you're stopped to take a blood alcohol test, and if your blood alcohol is 0.10, um, then you can be determined to be under the influence. And many people are killed even when individuals are less than that. Uh, in the 1990s, um, it says that, and I remember when I was practicing, that originally we had a blood alcohol content of 0.08 for drunk drivers, which made it illegal. But then they increased it to 0.10. And that's the federal standard all across the country. And so now it means that um, if you are 0.10, then you are going to be deemed to be driving under the influence. So, but originally, as I go back to the 90s, all the states had 0.08. And if your blood alcohol content was 0.08 or more, you were deemed to be impaired. But because of the increases in death and the lobbying by organizations such as MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and other organizations, then it went to 0.10. Okay, so the problem is that wait a minute, let me read this right, because I think I misled you. Mm-hmm. Okay, I stand corrected. I have to go back to what I originally remember when I was practicing. It was 0.10 when I first started out, which meant that because I was trying to figure out, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. It was 0.10 when I first started, because I started practicing in 78. So it was 0.10. Then they said, nope, you don't have to have as much alcohol to be deemed, and that's 0.08. That's the standard for right now. And the reason is because it was determined that people who were 0.10, they felt like, okay, that was bad. But actually, it was less than that that created a lot of injuries and deaths. So it's 0.08 that is the standard. That means that you're illegal per se. Now, if you don't take the blood alcohol test, and I'm glad I thought about that because something didn't sit right about what I was saying, um, is that uh, the injuries and deaths that increased caused the lobbying of the percentage to decrease. Okay, so operation of driving on a motor vehicle, it has to be a motor vehicle, upon a highway, road, parking lot, or driveway accessible to the public while impaired. That could mean that you're sitting in a car and you have what we call physical control of the vehicle. Physical control is defined as being in the driver's front seat of a vehicle or in the driver's position on a streetcar or any other kind of motorized vehicle, and having possession of the vehicle's ignition key or other ignition device. Now, that is how we determine it. Now, so for example, If you are parked in a car and the keys are in the ignition running and you're determined you're stopped, could you be charged with driving under the influence? Yes or no? Absolutely. And you know what's most interesting is that now they have cars, because my wife has one. Her car has a push button. You've seen those now where you don't even have to put the keys in the ignition. You just push the button with your foot on the brake pedal, and it starts the car up. Well, have you seen those, Joe? And so now what that means, and by the way, you do have to have possession of the keys to do that, because her keys could be in her purse, in the vehicle. Or if I have my set of keys, like hers, in my pocket, because we both have a set of keys to her car. And so, anyway, the point of the matter is that driving, sitting under the wheel, you can be held responsible for driving under influence because the car can start up. I know of a case of an individual who was sitting in a open field and the car was running and the person was knocked out asleep and they got charged with DUI. And they said, well, how could that be? The person wasn't driving. Nope. Again, the potential for being able to drive a vehicle is what gives you physical control of the vehicle. And so anyway, um, motor vehicles uh, frequently kill individuals where people are drunk driving and highly intoxicated. And so it says when a driver killed, they're not charged with intentional homicide to their intoxication. But when the driver causes death, the criminal act is referred to as a homicide because then when a person dies, and usually that's an involuntary manslaughter case, usually. So to have homicide while driving under the influence, you have to operate a vehicle under the influence of a drug or alcohol with a blood alcohol content of 0.08. Then you're considered as impaired, and then it results in the death of another person. That could be your passenger as well in the car. I represented a young man some years ago who one of his really good friends was killed because he was driving under the influence, and he ended up going to jail for a period of time. But he also got treatment because he had an alcohol problem. So it's important to note, as finally we conclude this section, that specific intent is not an element. Just the operation of the vehicle while impaired creates enough evidence. Okay. So I'm glad I cleared that up about that 0.08 because it didn't sound right the way that I was saying it to myself even. But so it's 0.08. It used to be 0.10. But because of the injuries and deaths increasing under 0.10 and the lobbying of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other organizations, then the level became 0.08. Some even argue that it should be lowered to 0.06. So we haven't reached that stage yet, but that could happen. That could happen. All right. So some of the things that we as law enforcement officers or people have observed on the roads to demonstrate where there's probably or possibly some impairment where the individual finds themselves dealing with the possibility of having what we call a standard fuel sobriety test. We're gonna talk about that in just a second, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, but driving behaviors. You see people weaving. Sometimes people are in a hurry. Driving through a traffic signal, striking a curb is a good example. I've seen people that strike from one side of the street to the other. And so we deal with these field sobriety tests where this will help the law enforcement officer to determine if the person is impaired. The horizontal gaze HGM test, the walk and turn test, the one-legged stand, where you have to walk a line or any of those different things, where you put your finger up and have the person to follow your finger and those kinds of things. These are things that law enforcement have performed on the side of the road. And if you get stopped, I've never been in one of these situations because I've never I don't drink, and I do use drugs that the doctor gives me. But and then if you ever notice your medication, just by for legal reasons, they put a note saying that it may impair your driving. But uh, it depends on the kind of drug that you're taking. I take amlodipine, which is for blood pressure, but it says on there that it could, but I have never had a problem with that. So, but they do that for legal protection. So anyway, the key thing is that you're under the influence, you're driving, and the police stop you. They can subject you to the field sobriety test where you end up performing one of these instructions. Okay, they'll tell you. And then, of course, then the breath test to determine the blood alcohol content. Um, and you have, as I said earlier, implicitly consented in every state of the union, if you are impaired driver, to consent to the chemical test. So if you don't do it, then your license can be suspended um, summarily. Now, there was an issue with blood draws because officers, they used to be able to do blood draws right there at the scene, but the Supreme Court in the case of Missouri versus McNeely in 2013 uh, changed that. And there are reasons why, because trying to do a blood draw, you're out in the streets and it wasn't the ideal place to do it. And so the reason, though, that the, the law enforcement people argue is that the blood alcohol content can disappear the longer you wait, and considered that drawing the blood was a exigent situation. And so the McNeely decision said today, and law enforcement today must have to must get a warrant to force a blood draw in drunk driving cases, unless some other exigent circumstances that really don't happen very often. Okay, so you won't be able to have the ability to be able to draw blood there. All right. Now dealing with what I've already kind of talked about is drug driving, impaired under the influence of drugs. Uh, Most of the time, you can't determine those by blood alcohol tests, but you can do those field sobriety tests and determine. However, if you're driving in those situations, you can still be held responsible and have your license suspended. Okay, because the um, the individuals that would work with the law enforcement people that a lot of departments have on staff are called um, DREs, or we used to call them DREs. That's what we call them. But drug recognition experts, and they've received classroom experience and field training to identify people who are drug impaired. And because of their observation in court, they're permitted to provide a legal opinion or conclusion. So these are other ways that you determine if a person is drugged while driving. The bottom line is they're driving under influence. If you want to learn more about that, you can look at this video, which tells you about how DREs operate. It's about a half an hour video. Any questions about that? Driving under influence or a drug? Okay. And so we look at, I think we got two more to go. We got distracted driving, and you know what that is. Texting. Did you not know that eating while driving is also considered uh, as distracted driving? Even talking on the phone. Now, every jurisdiction I know require hands-free. Does yours require hands-free, Joe? Almost every jurisdiction. I don't know of any that don't. And but you know what? I have I take issue with this. You know the GPSs that people have on their dashboards in their front. You know what I'm talking about? They're like little TV screens. I always have had some issues with that because I said that actually those can contribute to distracted driving because a person can be looking at that and involve themselves in an accident. Um, a lot of cars now that are being manufactured, like my wife's car, she has a Mercedes. It has it in the not on the top. You know how people buy them and they attach them, but you have now they're starting to put them at a level just above the radio and the heater in the car. You know what I'm talking about? And you begin to see those GPSs. They're built into the dash. I still say that you can still be distracted from that. But the number one distraction that seems to result in more deaths and injuries is, and they talk about it all the time, is what? Yep, that's it. And they focus on that. I have seen very few cases where a person was eating, but distracted driving, according to the National Highway Safety Commission, is any activity that diverts attention from driving. And that's why I mentioned those GPSs, including talking or texting on your phone, eating and drinking, talking to people in your vehicle. I haven't seen too many people get tickets for that. Fiddling with the stereo, oh yeah. Yeah, changing the stations, entertainment or navigation system. Basically, as I said, anything that uh, takes away your ability. Unfortunately, as it says, um, there's a whole lot of stuff. And if you take a time to look at this video, which we're not, you'll see what I'm talking about. And that deals with texting and driving. With the cell phone, grabbing your cell phone. I have to remind my wife sometimes. She'll be driving, and then um, I said, you got it in your system. Your phone can answer. You just hit a little button on your steering wheel and keep talking and driving. But did you not know, and has this ever happened to you, where you've been talking or listening to music and you're driving and you didn't realize how far you've traveled? Did that ever happen to you? Does that ever happen to you? Yeah, it happens to all of us. And it's not based on age or sex or any of those things. Again, that gets to the point that what I tell people, I says, there are people who are driving on automatic. People talking about automatic pilots driving. You're the automatic pilot sometimes because your mind is focused, but you keep control of your vehicle and those kind of things. But if you stop and think, you said, "Oh wow, I made it this far and this fast." Okay, that's what I'm kind of talking about. But anyway, the bottom line is this: is that distracted driving is a very serious offense, and it can contribute to liability for causing the serious injury to yourself or to others. And so try to focus as much as possible. Even I know people even that drive their car, they won't answer their phone, they won't use a GPS, they won't play their music, and they drive and they go to places, but they still can be distracted. They can be distracted by someone in the car. They can be distracted by reading a sign out, driving alone. And I'm not talking about like a stop sign or any of those, reading signs along the road, or those kind of things. And accidents happen as well. So there's a multitude of things. Distracted driving, as the final thing I'm going to say, along with drunk driving and drug driving, is a problem that is something that we need to be careful of. And unfortunately, because of these, I mentioned, unfortunately, injuries and sometimes death occurs. But you have to be focused. Remember, when you're behind the wheel, you're operating a high-powered vehicle, and it could potentially cause death to yourself or someone else. All right. So I'm going to conclude here with dealing with the hate crimes. Now, what is a hate crime? I'll just simply put it to you like this. We don't even have to go through all of this writing here. Is that a hate crime is when a crime takes place against an individual, some form of violence or damage to their property or something because of that person's race, sex, sexual preference, disability, and these are the things that happen. Now we have individuals who utilize LGBT as a basis. And hate crime legislation, what it did was on a federal level and now adopted in many states. It started on the federal level. If you look at 18 U.S. Code 249, that's Chapter 18 of the United States Code. At Section 249, you'll see the federal definition of hate crime that came out in 1968. And since that time, many states have picked up what we call hate crime laws. And so what that meant is that, let's use the example of the Wisconsin statute, is that intentionally committing a crime against another and selecting that person or their property because of their beliefs, so it's based on the religion or perception regarding the race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, or ancestry. If that is determined that that is the reason you committed that crime, it then elevates to a hate crime, which means that rather than it being a misdemeanor, if it's a battery, for example, it could elevate to a felony because it is our desire to decrease hate crimes. It is really sad, though, that in the last 4 years, hate crimes have been on the rise. And one of the reasons, and I'm just going to tell it like it is that the person who is the head of the country has encouraged it. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, or whatever you want to call yourself, Trumpican or whatever. The truth of the matter is the numbers speak for themselves, and we've looked at numbers that hate has increased. And you know what's interesting about it? It reminds me of what happened when I was younger. I came up, I'm 70, so I came up before the civil rights laws, where people were um, had crosses burned in their yard, where hate crimes were committed. And so now, after the civil rights laws, now and with the way that the country, some people think it is very serious. Like, for example, okay, person, we got killings in a synagogue, killings in a church, and things of that nature. Um, uh, Killing a person because they're not of the sexual preference that you believe, or just tying those things to it. It means that it's something more than just committing a crime. And so hate crimes need to be controlled. And hopefully, um, the enforcement of the law will recognize that. And so, how do you know if it's a hate crime? Well, all the surrounding circumstances will determine whether or not there is a hate crime. And remember this, it says here, there must be supporting evidence or facts that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, as I talked about earlier, that the synagogue or place was intentionally targeted because of the faith or the race or the sex or the national origin. Okay. And so a lot of times the person's words or actions will dictate that. Okay. And so that's what I wanted to say. Now, there's a case here that has to do with Wisconsin, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the Mitchell case, and I'm gonna stop with that one, and where it says the defendant, an African American, was sentenced to 2 additional years in prison. So it can be African Americans against white. It could be white against African American. The key thing is listen to this scenario: 2 additional years for targeting and instigating a fight against a white victim, that his intent was to target that white victim was when he used the words. He said, "There goes a white boy, go get him." The same thing would happen if it was vice versa. Chased the person down and committed an aggravated battery. And under the law, then this individual was intentionally selected the victim. Mitchell, though, argued, this is what the defendant said, that the penalty violated his free rights, his free speech rights, based on his words. Supreme Court said, nope, 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 nope. And that Mitchell's right to free speech ended when he carried out the act. And I talked about this before when I talked about the First Amendment and free speech, that you can't do things that incite violence. We talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about crimes against persons. You remember that? You remember me talking about that? Yeah, same thing. When I talked about that, but just where persons are involved and you commit the crime. And remember, we had some practice exam questions, and those questions involve individuals who said, "I'm going to kill this person," and that elevated it and changed it to another level. The bottom line is that this case stands for the proposition that free speech and thought, even vile thoughts, are protected, but they will violate hate crime laws when the thoughts turned into action. That's what I'm talking about. So after Mitchell, states began to define hate crimes as a misdemeanor of the second degree is reclassified as a misdemeanor of the first degree. A misdemeanor of the first degree, felony of the third degree. So the point of the matter is that it became more serious. Okay. So when you see a hate crime, and you're going to run across some of those, by the way, in your exam. All right. So that's all I have for today in terms of that. I want to talk about your key terms. We're a little over, but I want to take a few minutes and go over a few of these with you and have you to tell me. So be ready. Get your thinking cap on. A substance that is substantially similar to the chemical structure of a Schedule 1 or 2 drug, such as designer drugs, K2 or spice, that are substantially similar to marijuana and therefore are a controlled substance. What do we call those? K2 or spice. What do we call those? We talked about that earlier. You remember? Taking too long. Controlled substance analog. Remember that? We talked about that. Analog drugs. Very important because it's going to be on the test, I'm telling you. The impaired operation of a motor vehicle while under the influence of illicit drugs and or misuse of prescription drugs. What do we call that? That's right, drugged driving, not drunk. Okay. A legal concept that means in itself, often referred to drunk driving cases. What is the term that we call it? What does it in the in of itself mean? You might not know that. Do you know what in of itself means? Per se. Per se. Illegal per se. As remember the blood alcohol examples. Okay, so those are just some of those. So you can go through and do the rest of them. Okay, and I'm going to let me move this. Oops, wrong button. Okay, quit that one. That should close the window. Supposed to. Okay, then I'll do it this way. Then come back. Okay, then I'll just go back and share. Oops, that's not what I want to do because it won't let me. Share. Okay. I don't know why it won't let me do that. Let's try this one. It's locking me in here. Okay, let's do it this way. Let's do the flashcards. Then let's take them out. I hate this. It's not letting me get back to where I want to go. Okay, I know how to do that. Let's close that one. Okay, now we can do it. All right, this is going to be different when we get to the new system. Okay, so then we come back down here. So then we get to practice, and we open these up and we start the activity. So then you're going to match each of these, and you're going to match each of these by schedule, and then you're going to submit it, and it tells you which one. So we're not going to do those, but I'm just showing you how that works. Be sure you do those. There's 6 different ones so that you can make sure that you are prepared for the test. And then the last thing, which is so important, well, is this one, the practice quiz. Remember what I said? Some of these are on the test. According to the federal law, marijuana is a Schedule what drug? Okay. Yep. So then you are a police officer and you've stopped a motor vehicle for speeding. While standing alongside the open driver's window, you smell burnt marijuana coming from the vehicle. A search reveals marijuana in the center console. The driver claims it's not his. You may still enforce action because the driver is in what possession of the marijuana? That's wrong. Constructive. Remember, it's found in his console. It's not on him. Constructive occurs when a person has the right ability to control the item, but it's not on their person. Absolute would have put it on their person. While you got to make sure you read carefully. While searching a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance that is discovered to be homemade with chemical properties similar to ecstasy. This is considered a what? I said homemade with chemical properties similar to ecstasy. What are these? Which one of these is it? Schedule, schedule. That's wrong. It's actually this. It's a substance similar, but it's a chemical nature. Soon as you see that something is manufactured, homemade, then you're going to be dealing with analog. Incident, last one I'm going to do, to a lawful arrest, you search Jane and find, oh, no problem. You search Jane and find cocaine in her front left pants pocket. She says it's not hers, stating, they aren't my pants. That's a good one. Although she was wearing them. You arrested. You say that's an example of absolute possession. Is that what you said? Is that what you said? And you'd be wrong because there's no absolute possession. It's either active, actual, or constructive. actual when they have physical control. So you got to be very careful, very careful. So you have to read these questions and ask yourself, have I ever heard of absolute? Did I ever mention absolute? Didn't I mention two, actual or constructive? I didn't even mention partial because there's no such thing. It's either one or the other. Last, I didn't because there's not. Okay. So anyway, you go through these different things, and you know which three standard tests do law enforcement use, and you can go through and you can pick one of the pick the one. Which one you think? You think A? I think C. So you got to go back and look at those tests. Okay. So anyway, those are the things that I want you to um, be able to look at. Okay. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to let you go now. I'm going to give you the key word: hate crime. That's it. Give me that hate crime, and you get your points. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say good night to you. Hope to see you next week. We went a few minutes over because I wanted to make sure I go over those practice tests. I could cut it short and not, but I think it's helpful for me to go over them with you because it gives you reminds you of the importance of them. So I'll see you next week for the final one. Get those assignments in. And if you need anything, you know how to reach out to me. So I'm going to say good night. Good night. Thank you.